chapter 12, and the title here says Purification After Childbirth. The Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, if a woman conceives a child and gives birth to a son, she will be unclean for 7 days, just as she is during her menstrual period. On the 8th day, the flesh of the boy's foreskin must be circumcised. For 33 days, the mother will be in a state of blood purification. She must not touch anything holy or enter the sacred area until her time of purification is completed. But if the woman gives birth to a daughter, she will be unclean for 2 weeks, just as she is during her menstrual period. And she will be in a state of blood purification for 66 days. When the time of purification is complete, whether for a son or a daughter, the mother must bring a 1-year-old lamb as an entirely burned offering and a pigeon or turtle dove as a purification offering to the priest at the meeting tent's entrance. The priest will present it before the Lord and make reconciliation for her. She will then be cleansed from her blood flow. This is the instruction for any woman who has a child, male or female. But if the mother cannot afford a sheep, she can bring 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for the entirely burned offering and the other for the purification offering. The priest will then make reconciliation for her, and she will be clean.
Amen. What a blessing.
Well, I'm just going to read what the Women's Bible says about this. According to these regulations, a woman who gives birth is rendered temporarily unclean because of the blood flow, similar to that of menstruation. Leviticus specifically states she must not touch anything holy or enter the sacred area until her time for purification is completed. There were times when women were excluded from religious participation at the sacred area, as were men. But this suggests that there were times when women did enter the sacred area. Okay, that's what I hear.
Yikes.
Maybe that's the way the Israelites took it, but perhaps God was really thinking of that a woman's was very vulnerable then, as far as she could be vulnerable to infection. And maybe it was really the opposite, that she should keep away from people so that she doesn't, I mean, if you have a lot, even today, when people, you know, when women give birth and you have a newborn baby, you're just so careful about who comes around you because they could bring an infection to you. So I'm just trying to make this sound better than it does, okay? So.
No, I agree with you, Anne. I think that every time I've ever read this or read something similar, I've always thought, well, you know, God had a purpose for this and probably had to do with health issues versus just necessarily having to follow the law.
I really appreciate both of your effort to put a positive spin on this. I really do, and I wish I could join in your confidence here. I personally just think it's an example of the patriarchal system that was in charge, and they thought that all that women stuff was icky, and
You know, I want to.
But because it didn't just apply to childbirth, but it also applied every month to when a woman was having her period. So it wasn't a health question there. So, but I do appreciate. What's that, Anne? I'm sorry.
You got me there.
I appreciate your noble attempt, but I just think it's men being men, and they were in charge, and man, they're not that much different than men are today, that they really don't like to think about or certain aspects of a woman's body and things she goes through constantly. But anyway, so yeah, so.
Well, also in another vein, like let's face it, back then they did not have the facilities or the products to keep themselves clean. And so that would be embarrassing for the women to have to try to maneuver through that time every month and not having these accessories around them that could keep them comfortable and, you know, keep their, to their self.
To not,
Yeah. I
to not
can't find
bleed
the
out.
adjectives anymore, so.
Yeah, to not bleed all over the place. And I really appreciate your attempt to put a positive spin on this. I guess it's,
I
you know,
think anything biological back then was embarrassing because women had to go into hiding once they started showing. Even they couldn't be around in the public. It was like, oh, now we know what you've been doing.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I was thinking about two things that might serve a purpose for men. I mean, they want women to they want procreation and they want, babies born. So if, in the sense of protecting their future, maybe they see it as an investment in keeping them safe. That's stretching it a little. I agree with David. But, and the thing for women, I was thinking about, the only positive thing I can think of that during that time, women can't do all the work that they do. And secondly, for myself, when I don't feel particularly well, which happens now some, it's kind of a relief not to have to be around anybody. And maybe, for them, it wasn't maybe if they had been honest about it, okay, this time is for me. And, I'm sorry, David, I'm trying to think about it from a woman's perspective now. And I'm thinking, well, I'm kind of glad that I have some time here where I'm not supposed to be around other people at all. And so I'm going to do some things that I like to do. Maybe that's completely off the mark. I don't know.
Well, I have to agree with David though, because if they're trying to protect their women, then they could have said it in a different way. But always calling it unclean makes it
Yeah.
sound like you're, go away. We don't want to be around you. So.
Yeah, that's probably exactly it.
well, there was something about the blood that they considered to be unclean. And it's also notable that the fact that when a boy baby was born, the time for purification was half of that for when a daughter was born.
Sure.
So there was however you want to look at this, there was definitely some patriarchal view of this going on, that somehow women are less clean or require more cleansing than the boys do. Yeah. So
Why is it though that human blood associated with procreation is unclean, but all their sacrifices involve throwing blood everywhere? I don't get it.
Right, you're so right.
yeah, I was thinking about that too, Carol, that somehow the human blood is a different, brings needs to be purified, but yet they use the animal blood that's sacrificed to purify their sins. So yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure how they rationalize that in their thinking.
Right. Right. Yeah. I don't
Well,
know.
certainly they don't, every time I hear that, I really cringe. Because I see, the animals are part of the earth and everything, but it isn't in their culture. And well, it's just interesting that, I guess I don't have any sense of how they're, were they ever kind to animals that they didn't use? I mean, I don't think of that.
They might have used a dog or a cat for comfort, you know, how we use animals. I don't know. Wonder
Well,
if
they use dogs, but not necessarily as much for companion animals, but they used them for shepherding and things like that. It was an
Shepherding, yeah.
essential part of their culture to use dogs to help them shepherd sheep. You know, but yeah, if you look at this, it's not just that the woman isn't allowed there, but she's not allowed to touch anything. And if she does, if she makes it unclean, you know, so it's really a
think what
foreign
you-
culture to ours. Go ahead, Wesley. I'm sorry.
I think, no, that's okay. I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry. I think that, I think over in Deuteronomy, and whenever they talk about the actual laws about how a woman has to be during menstruation, not just pregnancy, but during menstruation, and the things that she's not allowed to touch, and things, you know, she couldn't even cook food because her husband couldn't touch the food that she cooked because she was unclean. And so I always wondered, what did they do? What did the man do? Because he wasn't going to go in the kitchen and start cooking dinner. I don't think so. You know, I mean, my
Good
husband's
question. Yeah.
really good about that.
That's
My
why they
husband's
had
really
more
good
than
about
one
that.
wife back then.
Yeah. But you know, maybe because they had concubines or whatever, they had their help. You know, had somebody to come in and help them do that stuff.
Well, poorer people certainly didn't have servants and concubines, so that is an interesting question what they did. So, yeah.
Wow, I just read something in the Women's Bible notes about this that may be interesting. I just scanned it. The Torah, it was called ritual impurity. The Torah, the instruction speaks of two kinds of ritual impurity. The first is related to what goes into our bodies, such as food, while the second is related to what comes out of our bodies, including menstrual blood and semen. Uncleanness is not, however, a negative reflection on a person or an action. Instead, it's the way the Israelites navigated the force of the holy. When a woman gave birth, she participated in the creative force of life. Though natural, it was powerful. She did not go back to normal after that, they believed, without a ritual that purified her. Similarly, the last prohibiting women from coming to the sanctuary after childbirth was another way of navigating two different forms of holiness: the natural form brought through childbirth and the designated space of worship brought through the temple, and specifically the most holy place in the temple. To combine these two potent forces of holiness was fearsome. When a woman gave birth to a daughter who also claimed the creative life force, 2 weeks of distance were required. Rather than being negative, these laws upheld the unique creative power that women hold as bearers of life. Honor and a little fearful reverence was given to this power, not only in childbirth, but every month as she separated herself during her menses. So I guess there was a tinge of the feeling of grave importance, you know, whether the woman felt it personally or not. That's, you know.
Yeah. The only
I'm-
other thing, you know,
I'm not sure. I was just going to say, I'm not sure I follow the logic that that's an honor, but okay.
Yeah, I don't either.
well, it is an honor to us to, you know, everybody's excited when you're going to have a baby, and everyone's excited about the baby that's coming. And even back then, probably, you know, it was exciting to have a baby. That the problem was when a little girl came along, it wasn't quite as exciting anymore. You know, because they wanted those boys to follow, you know, to follow along in the family tradition. The only other thing that we mentioned is that there were times where the women did had been in the holy place. And I was just wondering, when did women ever get to go into the holy place? Because The only time I would think is maybe when they had to go clean, but otherwise, I don't know, when would a woman be allowed to go into the most holy place? Because usually it was only the priests.
Good
Or
question.
maybe-
Well, didn't they, I mean, Jewish people still kind of segregate where the men and the women are allowed to go in the temple. So maybe there were only certain places in the holy place the women were allowed to go at all.
Well, that depends on what kind of Judaism you're talking about.
Yeah,
You know,
that's true.
Hasidic Judaism and conservative Judaism, I think, have separation. You know, more Reformed traditions
Right.
don't. And they don't have a temple anymore. So there is no holies of holies anymore. So that's not an issue. As far as that goes, the temple was destroyed and there's only one temple. It's not been rebuilt yet. So,
There you go.
yeah. But anyway, so yeah, so I don't know. Have we talked enough about this chapter? Do we want to go on to the next, or have we get all the spiritual truth out of it that we possibly
Yeah.
can?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so anybody want to read the next chapter?
Is it chapter 13?
Yes.
Yeah.
You don't have to read the whole thing.
It's a
Uh,
long one, yeah.
Yeah.
Would you like me to read up to?
It's
well,
it's all one thing. It's all about infections and skin diseases and goodness gracious.
How about going, well, if you want to read to 47, that's kind of long.
Give it a try.
Okay.
Don't fall asleep, okay? And I
What
have,
are you reading out of?
I think I may have the same as Mary, the Common English Bible.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, I don't know. Greg calls it the Women's Bible. I don't
Oh,
know.
okay. Well, I have the Common English Bible, but it was almost exactly what you were reading. So,
right.
diagnosis of skin disease. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, when a person has a swelling, a scab, or a shiny spot on their skin, and it becomes an infection of skin disease on their skin, they will be brought to the priest, either to Aaron or one of his sons. The priest will examine this infection on the skin. If hair in the infected area has turned white and the infection appears to be deeper than the skin, then it is an infection of skin disease. Once the priest sees this, he will declare the person unclean. But if the shiny spot on the skin is white and does not appear to be deeper than the skin and the hair has not turned white, the priest will quarantine the infected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest will again examine the infection. If he sees that it has remained the same, the infection has not spread on the skin, the priest will quarantine the person for 7 more days. On the 7th day, the priest will examine it again. If the infection has faded and has not spread over the skin, the priest will declare the person clean. It is just a rash. The person must wash their clothes and then they will be clean again. If the rash continues to spread over the skin after they have appeared before the priest for purification, they must again show themselves to the priest. If the priest sees that the rash has spread over the skin, the priest will declare the person unclean. It is a case of skin disease. Whenever someone has an infection of skin disease, they will be brought to the priest. If the priest sees that there is a white swelling on the skin and has turned the hair white, then there is a patch of raw flesh in the swelling, then it is a case of chronic skin disease on their skin. The priest will declare the person unclean. The person will not quarantine, the priest will not quarantine such persons because they are already unclean. But if the skin disease continues to break out so that the disease covers all of the infected person's skin from head to toe, as far as the priest can tell, then the priest will make an examination. I feel this is way above his pay grade, but he's doing his best.
This is the earliest Grey's Anatomy textbook here.
I know.
They're training the priests to be doctors here.
If the skin disease has covered the person's whole body, the priest will declare the infected person clean. Whoa, wait a minute. If the skin disease has covered the person's whole body, the priest will declare the infected person clean. The person has turned entirely white, he is clean. But as soon as his raw flesh appears in the swelling, they will be unclean. When the priest sees the raw flesh, he will declare the person unclean. Raw flesh is unclean. It is a case of skin disease. But if the raw flesh turns white again, the person will go back to the priest. The priest will examine it. If the infection has turned white, the priest will declare the infected person clean. At that point, the person is clean. I felt like there was a lot of contradictions in that
Yeah.
section, but
We're talking about Middle Eastern people. How do they, I've been a nurse for a long time. It's hard to tell color changes on people that are darker complected.
that's true.
How do they know when these color changes are happening?
Whenever someone has a boil on their skin, it heals, and in place of the boil, there is a white swelling or reddish white shiny spot. It must be shown to the priest. If the priest sees that it appears to be lower than the skin and its hair has turned white, the priest will declare the person unclean. It is an infection of skin disease that has broken out in the boil. But if the priest examines it and there is no white hair in it, it is not lower than the skin and it is faded. The priest will quarantine the person for 7 days. If it continues to spread over the skin, the priest will declare the person unclean. It is an infection. But if the shiny spot remains where it was and does not spread, it is just a scar from the boil. The priest will declare the person clean. I think I'm gonna take a break right here.
Yeah, it's just gonna go on the same and the same. If it's this or if it's that. I don't get what the hair has to do with it. If it's, I can see if it's swelling, if there's like fluid filled, I can see where they're concerned, but I don't know. I've never been that concerned about the hair color. When I've looked at infected skin, I don't get the hair business.
Well, I mean, I think
Well,
they're-
Go ahead, Ann, please.
No, go ahead.
No, you have far more expertise in this issue than
Oh.
I do.
I guess I feel like obviously there's no scientific basis to anything they're doing at this period in history, except for maybe trial and error, from prior experience. So it seems to me it's not an issue about healing a person. It's about like just trying to determine if they're clean or unclean. That just seems to be there's no treatments ever prescribed. The whole
Right.
the whole reason to go to the priest is just this whole label of clean and unclean.
Well, I think in a way I'm thinking, this is early when they're all living in tents in communities that are close, sleeping next to each other and stuff. And it's at least their primitive attempt at cleanliness and
Or trying to stop the spread.
prevent it from spreading throughout the community. Because when you hear about Dickinsonian England, or the poor people is just rampant with disease and infection because they weren't doing very good sanitation. So I think that maybe this is an early attempt at them trying to prevent disease from spreading through their community.
Yeah, I think so.
Does anyone else want to read a little bit?
Sure. Where'd you leave off?
I left off on 24.
24.
Verse,
I have this women's devotional Bible here.
The
It says,
NIV.
when someone has a burn on his skin and a reddish white or white spot appears in the raw skin flesh of the burn, the priest is to examine the spot, and if the hair in it has turned white, here we are white again, and it appears to be more than skin deep, it is an infectious disease that has broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is an infectious skin disease. But if the priest examines it and there is no white hair in the spot, and if it is not more than skin deep and has faded, then the priest is to put him in isolation for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine him, and if it is spreading in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. I find this interesting because when you're taking care of people that have been exposed to diseases, they usually say 7 to 10 days. It takes 7 to 10 days for the infection to incubate. So that's interesting that they're watching him for 7 days. If, however, the spot is unchanged and has not spread in the skin, but has faded, it is swelling from the burn, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is only a scar from the burn. If a man or woman has a sore on the head or on the chin, the priest is to examine the sore, and if it appears to be more than skin deep, and the hair in it is yellow and thin, the priest shall pronounce that person unclean. It is an itch, an infectious disease of the head or chin. But if, when the priest examines this kind of sore, it does not seem to be more than skin deep, and there is no black hair in it, then the priest is to put the infected person in isolation for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine the sore, and if the itch has not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and it does not appear to be more than skin deep, he must be shaved except for the diseased area, and the priest is to keep him in isolation another 7 days. Well, there's a treatment, shaving them. On the 7th day, the priest is to examine the itch, and if it is not spread in the skin and appears to be no more than skin deep, the priest shall pronounce him clean. He must wash his clothes, and he will be clean. But if the itch does not spread in the skin after he is pronounced clean, the priest is to examine him, and if the itch has spread in the skin, the priest does not need to look for yellow hair. The person is unclean. If, however, in his judgment it is unchanged and the black hair has grown in it, the itch is healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. When a man or woman has white spots on the skin, the priest is to examine them, and if the spots are dull white, it is a harmless rash that has broken out on the skin, and that person is clean. When a man has lost his hair and is bald, he is clean.
Oh my.
That's true, I guess. If he has lost his hair from the front of the scalp and is bald and has a bald forehead, he is clean. But if he has a reddish white sore on his bald head or forehead, it is an infectious disease breaking out on his head or forehead. The priest is to examine him, and if the swollen sore on his head or forehead is reddish white, like an infectious skin disease, the man is diseased and is unclean. The priest shall pronounce him unclean because of the sore on his head. The person with such an infectious disease must wear torn clothes, let his hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of his face, and cry out, unclean, unclean. Oh man. As long as he has the infection, he remains unclean. He must live alone, and he must live outside the camp. That's like putting a red scarlet letter on him. Unclean, unclean. I'm gonna stop there.
Well, this is, of course, this is, they didn't have any public health department or
Correct.
anything. So this is, the priest is taking the place of both cultic uncleanness or ritual uncleanness and public health issues. And so it sounds a lot like it's, they're talking about something that we would maybe look at as like leprosy or something like that,
Or
which is
measles, or in Africa, there's a disease of the skin called yaws, which is similar to measles. I mean, it just sounds like they've been observing all these skin disorders that people have, and some of them cause a big problem, others don't. So they have to decide whether they have a big problem skin disease or one that's just going to take care of itself, like acne or something. But it's weird.
I'm just glad the bald guys are, clean because.
Well, it is true. I mean, when you go to surgery, what do? They prep you, they shave you all off because bacteria will reside in hair follicles. So they do shave you so you're bald when you're going to have surgery. So anyway, somebody else want to read about mildew?
I'll read the next section. Okay, so we're on verse 47 here.
Correct.
Okay. I'm going to read out of the Message.
Okay.
If clothing, woolen or linen clothing, woven or knitted cloth of linen or wool, leather or leatherwork, is infected with a patch of serious fungus, and if the spot in the clothing or leather or the woven or the knitted material or anything made of leather is greenish or rusty, that is a sign of serious fungus. Show it to the priest. The priest will examine the spot and then confiscate the material for 7 days. On the seventh day, he will re-examine the spot. If it has spread in the garment, the woven or knitted or leather material, it is the spot of a persistent serious fungus, and the material is unclean. He must burn the garment because of the persistent and he must burn the garment. Because of the persistent and contaminating fungus, the material must be burned. But if when the priest examines it, the spot has not spread in the garment, the priest will command the owner to wash the material that has the spot, and he will confiscate it for another 7 days. He'll then make another examination after it has been washed. If the spot hasn't changed in appearance, even though it hasn't spread, it is still unclean. Burn it up, whether the fungus has affected the back or the front. If, when the priest makes his examination, the spot has faded after it has been washed, he is to tear the spot from the garment. But if it reappears, it is a fresh outbreak. Throw whatever has the spot in the fire. If the garment is washed and the spot has gone away, then wash it for a second time. It is clean. These are the instructions regarding a spot of serious fungus in clothing of wool or linen, woven or knitted material, or any article of leather, for pronouncing them clean or unclean. Man, it must have been exhausting to follow all these rules. Like how, if you had a little tiny spot, maybe you got like spaghetti sauce on your garment, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to bring this to the priest. Like, don't the priests have better things to do?
Yeah, the state of medicine was so much different. They didn't have any idea of the concept of bacteria or viruses. They couldn't examine things under a microscope. They were just doing some gross physical examinations and trying to prevent the outbreaks of great and big infections, going throughout the people. So it's really hard to understand that whole worldview because it's so foreign, so far away from us, that to live in that is just, it's kind of incomprehensible for us because it was just so different.
This is why I always take issue with the literalist readings of the Bible, because especially if you're a New Testament Christian, it doesn't make any sense that you'd pick out a little section of Leviticus and say, well, I'm holding this up because this is what the Bible says. I mean, look at some of this stuff. If you're not, none of these laws is given any greater or lesser weight than any other one. Like, no one's saying like man shall not lie with man as with a woman is more important than the stuff about mold and linens. So it makes no sense to pick one section out and say, this is it. This is what's evil.
Right.
I agree with you. They would argue that Paul says in one passage how that sexual sin is worse than any other kind of sin because it's sin against the self. But I agree with you. I understand what you're saying. I'm just presenting their argument and their response.
Sure.
But how do you parse all this out? How do you parse? They would make a distinction between the moral law and the ritual or cultic or some of the or the public or the civic laws. They would say how they parse all that out. Well, which is a little different, but that's how they do that. Is they say we don't have to follow the ritual law anymore. We don't have to follow the civic law anymore. We just have to follow the moral law that's still in effect. Now, I don't agree with that because I think we're under grace, not law. But I'm just presenting the argument that they make.
Sure.
Yeah. So. I don't know. It was a much different world. It was a world with a lot less knowledge, a lot more fear, a lot more concern about. Back then they had concerns about any weird thing that happened on their body, afraid that they were going to get leprosy or some other disease and die from it. Now we can't get even people to agree to wear masks and be vaccinated against the pandemic. So yeah,
Shitty.
anyway, so
Well,
I don't know.
yeah.
My question is what about cleanliness? Did they clean? Did they wash their clothes at all? Or did they only have one outfit? So they just lived in that outfit forever? Or what? I mean, how did they, because they probably didn't understand the idea that you had to wash your hands after you went to the bathroom, or those kind of things. Those were not part of their daily routines.
When did they
So-
start doing their ritual baths and stuff? Because they'd have to go do ritual baths 2 or 3 times a day, especially if they were going to go in the temple, right? Am I
They just know they had to wash their hands. They had to use 2.5 eggshells worth of and just pour the water over their hands. But that was more ritual than it was, actual, that would clean. That's what they're talking about when Jesus and the disciples were out there eating with unwashed hands. They were being criticized by, the leaders at the time. They caught them doing it and said, well, look, your disciples aren't, ceremonially washing their hands. And I don't think they understood the concept of germs and things like that, but they had a ceremonial kind of concept. And of course, they didn't use soap or anything like that. But yeah, so it was just
Well, they lived in the desert too. I would think that water would be pretty precious commodity out there in the middle of the Sinai desert. I don't know.
Yeah, good point.
Well,
So where are we
so
at?
is Leviticus just it's a bunch of different rules to live by, right? That's why we don't get this in church very often when they're reading the readings. I don't remember hearing much of Leviticus in the readings during services.
It would be
No.
interesting to see what Greg would do with these things. I mean, I haven't been part of the first part of the rule recitations because I couldn't be there, but I mean, has Greg been elucidating on this whole rule thing?
Not really. He just did a lot of talking that some of the rules earlier on in Leviticus were more about how the priests were supposed to be and how it kind of coincided with how the church was, like with the bishops and the hierarchies of the church. And that's kind of taken away from there, but he really didn't expound too much on these type of rules. I mean, I'm not sure any of us go up to Greg and have them say, "Oh, look at my boil." What do you think? Are you coming to church or not?
Yeah.
I don't think that's, those of course are things of are past from past situations or culture, but no, he didn't really say too much about those kind of things. He primarily just talked about the earlier part where it was talking about some of the duties of the priests inside the temple, and when they were throwing blood around and all sorts of stuff.
So were these rules all developed before or after Exodus?
That's a good question.
Okay. And the other
Because the time, when was the time that these practices were developed? When were they passed down through tradition? When were they actually written down? And probably these were written down the time after the Exodus.
yeah.
I mean, not the Exodus, I'm sorry. The time after when the exile.
Mm.
And so they're old, or rather they're much newer than this time. And so how much has the ritual cultic practices, how much have they developed since the time of what was actually happening in the wilderness in the tent of meeting? That's a very good question. It's
Yeah, 'cause
pretty hard to determine an answer on that.
would the Egyptians have let the priests be going around inspecting all their slaves and stuff? And I don't know. It just
Well,
seems.
this is post post Exodus. Yeah,
Hmm.
definitely.
So, David, you're very knowledgeable about this. Why are there some numbers in the Bible that are so highly thought of, like 3, 7, and 40? Those numbers are repeated over and over again in the Bible. What is it about those numbers that are?
Certain numbers have been believed to have spiritual significance in terms of their what they mean when they're used as not actual numbers, but representative of certain spiritual realities. I'm not an expert in spiritual numerology because I don't pay. It doesn't interest me, to be honest.
Right.
But yeah, there are certain, say, 7 has a certain significance, and 4, and they all have different significances based on the fact that maybe in some places that they're used, they're not talking about a literal number, but significant of a greater of a spiritual truth. But that's certainly not my area of expertise. I could look it up on Google and we could,
Well,
we
yeah,
could
I could
see
too.
what that
but
is.
it
But
just-
but it's I'm not an expert on that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, what's
Do you
I'm not
wanna
sure. I don't
next
know if we want to. What's next here? I don't know.
chapter's more skin disease, and then after that is more of the sexual genital information. So we might want maybe we just want to stop here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do. I don't see any reason not to. Why don't we say we went through Leviticus 13, because and just we can start with 14 next week. If we want to go, if we want to really, we can do some research on skin disease if we want to in the ancient Middle East, or if not. But I don't think we want to go into the sexual practices, part of it, because I think
That's not till 15.
Greg might have something to say about that. But anyway, he might, I'm just, well, I don't know what anyone else wants to do. Does that sound good to everyone else then,
Yeah,
or what?
Yes,
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if we want to talk more about skin diseases, we can. But yeah, anyway, well, yeah. Yeah, it's just, I think the important lesson for me to learn about all this is that purity was very important for the ancient Israelites. And there was, like Mary was first saying, there's a conflation of ritual purity and actual purity in terms of health and things like that. There was a conflation there where it all came together. It was an important thing, and they lived their lives according to this purity code that served as both their religion, their public health, and even their civil laws. It all was together, and it was all viewed as something that came from God and treated very seriously, as So that's a different worldview than we have, where we divide all these things up into compartments.
Right. Well, and
So.
back then, I mean, things were very primitive back then. And if you look at things at the hierarchy of human needs, if the community is physically unwell, they can't reach spiritual wellness. So maybe that's part of the reason for all these directions of how to maintain physical wellness, so that their bodies and minds are able to reach for a higher spiritual wellness.
Yeah, and along with that is the idea that most physical illnesses at that time were believed to be sent by God. At least that was the understanding at the time, that if you had a physical ailment, that was something that very often people believed that that was something you deserved because it was representative
Right.
of something.
You brought it
something
on
you've done
yourself.
well. Yeah, exactly. And God was using this as a judgment.
Yeah, right.
That your purification processes and the offerings and things would bring about forgiveness. And when God forgave you, then disease would disappear and then you would be permitted back into the community. And that's the big thing about these purification laws. They separated a person entirely from the community. You know,
Mhm.
when so one of these things came up, they were by themselves. They were all by themselves. They were no longer part of the community. And that was the closest thing to nearly a death sentence. You
Yeah.
know, you heard what they had to, you know, they had to dress a certain way and mess their hair up and, you know, cover their faces. And the next thing, you know, and shout unclean, unclean, and no one could come near them. So yeah, it was a really a horrendous thing to go through. So anyway.
So would a woman have to have done that for their time after birth or
No,
during their
no,
menstrual cycle?
no, there was different instructions. That was separate. You know, they were, those instructions were just, you go out into a separate tent and stay there for a certain period of time and then you make your purification. Yeah. So anyway, so I don't know, they might have had a purification, they might have had a tent outside that all of the women that were going through their periods at the same time shared together, you know. Yeah, so there might have been some community there. Anyway, it was nice talking with all you and sharing, learning a lot about
Skin
deep
diseases.
spiritual truths, deep spiritual truths. You know, no, but just to understand that the Bible was written in a very different time frame, and it, like, you know, Brendan was talking about some of the implications of that it came from a completely different context. And we need to keep that context carefully in mind when we look at the Old Testament passages and not just just take a discrete Old Testament passage and plop it down in the middle of our culture and say, yeah, this is truth for now too. It was truth forever and for always, you know.
Right.
So yeah.
I went to a lecture. I heard a lecture on just that thought, where the Old Testament came from a different mindset of the people, because like, and the example that was given was the commandment, thou shalt not steal. But back then, because it was such a communal society and people were hungry all the time, that if you went into somebody's field, you could take as much of the food as you want as long as you ate it there. You couldn't take it and leave. But so that wouldn't have been considered stealing, which today that would have still been considered stealing. But anyway.
Well, I don't know. I hope you all have a really nice week. And I'm not sure what's going on at the church, but you know, and the needs, but we can remember some of those needs in prayer. I know there's a lot of physical needs and things coming up, and there's the Saturday night. Hopefully it's not going to rain the Saturday night blessing of the pets and everything, animal blessing of the animals, you know, and stuff away. But anyway, I enjoyed this time. I don't know what else to say other than I hope you all have a good week and take care. We'll be seeing you soon. So
David, I sent an email to Chrissy Pullock and I got about a note back, or Putluck, and I got a note back that it went to you. So I don't know if you got an email from me saying that I was going to be at choir practice on Sunday. For some reason, it went to you instead of Chrissy, according to my internet.
I think it went to everybody, Carol, because I got that too.
Oh, okay. But my response said went to David, just to David, and not to Chrissy. So I don't know. So
I didn't read that. I didn't read that email yet. So.
Yeah, maybe that's part of what's going on at church with their internet.
I want to thank everybody for this gathering. You know, for me, it's being with people, and I don't get to do that except with my family for part of the month. And so I just really appreciate being with you all.
And we appreciate seeing you too, Mary. Yeah, we're praying for you.
Thank you.
Well, you all have a good week. I'm gonna
Bye-bye.
Zip out of here.
Bye-bye.
You take care. Bye-bye.
everybody.
Sunday. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Leave. On.
Come on.
It won't let, it's not letting me leave.
Me neither.
Okay. All right. I'm still on here somehow. Close all.
Come on. There we go.